The lord of the house watched his guests laugh, and he did not lift a hand to stop them. In the great hall of Whitmore Park, a young woman stood near the door with her head bowed and her hands folded at her waist. Her name was Eleanor Whitfield. She had been brought up from the workroom because one of the ladies had torn the lace on her evening glove. Eleanor had mended it in less than a minute. She had done it with steady hands, the way her mother had taught her, by candlelight and without a word. That should have been the end of it. It was not. A woman in pink silk, who was a friend of the bride-to-be, leaned toward her neighbor. "Look at her hands," she said, just loud enough to carry, "like a kitchen girl's hands." And then she laughed, and the lady beside her laughed, and then 5 more ladies laughed, and the laughter ran through the hall like wind through dry leaves. A man at the piano turned his head. A footman near the wall looked away. Nobody spoke up for Eleanor. Eleanor did not move. She kept her eyes on the floor. She had learned slowly and without being told that her own family had traded her like coin. Her elder sister, Margaret, had married a man who drank their small house down in one bad winter. The cousin who now held the debt note sent a letter each month that smelled of vinegar and threat. Eleanor had walked the 8 miles to Whitmore Park in the early spring with a single box of thread and 1 change of clothes, and she had asked Mrs. Hale for work. Mrs. Hale had taken her on as a mender of fine things. The wages were small, but they were honest. Every month, Eleanor sent most of her pay home to Margaret's children, who were thin and growing. So she had stopped expecting mercy, and in that not expecting, she had found her strange and quiet armor. The Duke stood across the room with a glass of wine in his hand. His name was Edmund Ashworth. Duke of Whitmore, he was 34. He had already buried 1 wife. Her name had been Anne. She had died of a winter cough 3 winters after their wedding. Before she died, she had taken his hand and whispered that she was sorry she had not loved him more. He had never forgotten those words. He had built his life since then, like a man building a stone wall in winter. He kept everyone at a distance, because distance was the only place where he did not have to feel. He had loved once. He had lost. He had decided, in the long dark of that loss, that he would not risk his heart again. He watched the ladies laugh. He knew that Eleanor was a seamstress from the village. He knew she was poor. He did not know her name. He turned back toward his glass. He did not lift a hand to stop the laughter. He told himself, the way he had told himself many times, that a housekeeper could not run a ballroom. He told himself that stepping in would only make the evening worse. He did not see that silence. In a house where he was lord was a kind of permission. In the 3rd week of June, a letter had arrived at the estate for the Duke's eyes alone. It had been brought by his own mother, the Dowager Duchess, who lived in a quiet wing at the back of the house. The letter told him again that she had chosen a bride for him. The bride was Lady Catherine Grenville, the only daughter of an earl whose lands and money had almost gone. The marriage would give Edmund a political friend. It would give Catherine's father a roof. It would give Edmund's mother a daughter-in-law she could manage. It was to take place in 8 weeks. The Duke had not written a careful letter to his bride. He had written a cold one. He had written it the way he wrote contracts. He had laid out the rooms she would have. He had laid out the days when he would see her, and the days when he would not. He had written, almost at the end, that no part of his heart was hers to claim. He thought this was the kind way. He thought this was fair. That letter sat that very evening on the silver tray by the side door, sealed with his dark blue wax and waiting to be sent. Eleanor passed the tray on her way back to the workroom. She did not touch it, but she saw it. The seal was deep, almost black in the candlelight, and the paper was heavy under her gaze. She remembered who it was for. She walked on. That was the first time the letter entered her life. The next morning, the great house began to change. Flowers arrived from the greenhouse, white roses by the armful, tall candles in silver sticks. A piano was rolled into the smaller ballroom. Ladies came from 3 counties, and their trunks filled every upstairs gallery. The plan for the wedding moved through the house like a new wind, and even the servants could feel it. The housemaids whispered about the new air that would come. The kitchen boy dropped a plate and cried. Mrs. Hale walked the halls with her hands folded, and her kind mouth was set in a thin line. Eleanor worked as she had always worked. She rose before the kitchen girl. She stitched by candlelight when the day was done. She kept her face still. She kept her voice low. She did her work, and she did not trouble the house. She did, however, begin to be seen. The Duke's mother had asked her to fit the bride's veil. The bride was smaller than Eleanor, and the hem had to be lifted by a finger's width. While Eleanor knelt on the floor at the bride's feet, the bride spoke to her as if she were a piece of furniture. "Pull it tighter," Lady Catherine said. "I do not want it to drag." Eleanor said, "Yes, my lady." She pulled it tighter. She thought of her sister Margaret, who had married a man who spoke to her the same way. She thought, too, of her own mother, who had been a small woman with kind hands, and who was long in the ground. She stitched the hem and did not cry. Lady Catherine was not, in truth, a cruel woman. She was a frightened one. Her father's lands were gone. Her mother had run off with a younger man when Catherine was small. She had been raised by aunts who quarrelled over her dress money at every meal. A marriage to the Duke was the only door left open to her, and she needed it shut behind her before the season ended. She was not mocking Eleanor out of pride. She was holding on to what little pride she had, the way a tired swimmer holds on to a board. Eleanor felt this. She did not name it, but she felt it, and a small, soft pity slipped into her chest, the way warmth slips into cold hands at a fire. She set the veil on the bride's head. She smoothed the lace with her thumb. She did not say a word. The real cruelty that night came from someone else. It came from Lady Beatrice Ashford, who was Lady Catherine's only true friend. Lady Beatrice was the kind of woman who laughs loudest when she is most afraid. Her own cousin had married beneath his birth, and the family had cut him off in public. Her own dowry was 3 months behind, and the banker had sent 2 letters she had not yet answered. She needed the wedding to go well, because if it did not go well, her season in society was over, and her name would go cold in 3 counties before the autumn. So she drank a little too much wine, and when Eleanor came up to mend the torn glove, Lady Beatrice looked her up and down and spoke the words that no one at the Duke's table would have spoken in daylight. She said, "Is this the help? My dear Duke, I did not know your seamstress would be joining us for the music." And then she smiled, and then she laughed. Edmund looked across the room at Eleanor. He saw the way she held her hands, palm over palm, the way school children hold their hands in line. He saw the way her chin did not move. He saw that she was not going to run, and she was not going to speak. He felt something in his chest that he did not want to feel, because feeling would mean he had let something happen that he ought to have stopped. So he did what he had learned to do with feeling. He turned away. He lifted his glass. He looked at the wallpaper above the mantel, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. He did not lift a hand to stop them. The hall kept its noise. The ladies kept their laughter. Eleanor walked to the side door. She placed the mended glove on a small table. She stepped out into the cool night air, where the lawn smelled of cut grass, and the first star was showing above the roof. She stood very still for a moment, with her palms flat against the cold stone of the doorframe. Then she walked back to the workroom. She did not cry. She had learned, very young, that crying was a sound other people could use against you. Back in the workroom, she found her sister Margaret's letter waiting on the table by her candle. The cousin's note was inside the same envelope. They were always together now, the begging letter and the threat note, as if they had grown into one piece of paper. Eleanor read them once. She folded them. She put them in her pocket. She put her head down on her arms, and she let herself stay still for one long breath. Then she sat up, lit a new wick in her candle, and picked up her needle. The thread ran through the cloth with a quiet, steady hum. Lady Beatrice, in her own wing that night, sat down at her mirror and took the pins from her hair. She saw in the glass a face she did not like. She thought of what she had said. She thought of the seamstress's hands which had been so still. She thought of her own cousin, who had married beneath his birth, and who now kept a quiet house by the sea. She did not sleep well. She would not say sorry the next day. She would instead send Eleanor a cup of soup at noon, and she would not sign the note that came with it. That was the most her pride would let her do. 3 nights later, something small changed between Eleanor and the Duke. He had come down to the library for a book he could not sleep without. He passed the workroom door and saw her lamp still burning, a low golden light under the door crack. He paused. He did not knock. He stood in the dark hall for a moment and watched her through the thin opening. The way a man watches rain he cannot stop. What he saw was a young woman with her shoulders set square and her mouth a flat line, working as if the work itself was keeping her alive. He left a small jar of tea and a heel of bread on the floor just outside the door before he walked back to his room. He did not speak to her. He did not knock. He did not let her know it was him. In the morning, when Eleanor found the tea and the bread on the mat, she thought first of the kind housekeeper, Mrs. Hale. Then she thought of no one at all. She drank the tea. She ate the bread. She worked. Edmund went on with his days. He was not kind by nature. He was kind by accident. He had ordered the rooms in his life the way rooms are ordered in a tidy house. Each room had its place. Each person had a key. The seamstress had her own small room, and her door did not meet his. He was, in truth, a man who had stopped expecting love for himself. He had made peace with that, the way one makes peace with a long rain. But Eleanor, in her silence, was beginning to bend his line. Once, when she was carrying a stack of folded veils down the long gallery, the bottom veil slipped and slid toward the floor. Edmund was passing on his way to his study. He bent and lifted it without a word. Their hands did not touch, but they nearly did. He felt his chest go tight, the way a chest tightens when a clock strikes an hour you did not expect. He walked on. She walked on. Neither spoke. She began to notice small things about the house that no one else in the busy season had time to notice. The clock in the West Hall ran 2 minutes slow. The piano in the small ballroom was out of tune in the middle keys. The roses by the front steps were always cut too short, and they had been that way since long before the wedding. She fixed none of these things, but she saw them, and each time she saw one, the house felt a little less like a cage and a little more like a place where a person could live, the way a coat feels less like a cage once it has been shaped by your own shoulders. Edmund saw her noticing. He saw her walk past the piano without looking, and then turn her head just a little, as if she wanted to play a single note but did not think she was allowed. He saw her stop by the clock and look at its face, the way a person looks at someone they would like to help but cannot yet reach. He saw that she had the quiet habit of a person who had kept a small house in good order. He liked that habit. He wished she had not come into his life at a time when his life was about to be tied to a woman he did not love, a woman who was, in his own heart, already half a stranger. He did not write to break things off. He was not brave in that way. He was brave in small, careful ways, like leaving bread in a doorway. The night Eleanor had stood in the great hall and let the laughter blow past her like a wind, she had not, in fact, kept silent in every way. She had done one thing. When Lady Beatrice had said the cruel line about the music, Eleanor had walked to the piano. She had not run. She had lifted the fall. She had played 3 notes, with her fingers steady and her back straight. They were clear and slow and true. They were not a song. They were only a breath. The way a person says one word in a room full of louder people and means everything by it. Then she had stood, and she had curtsied to the room. But she had not curtsied to Lady Beatrice. She had curtsied, instead, to the white roses on the table, as if they were the only worthies in the room and the only people worth the trouble of her bow. The ladies went quiet. They did not know what to say. The Duke's mouth had moved a little at the corner, in a way that no one but Eleanor saw, because she was already on her way out. That small bow to the roses, and not to Lady Beatrice, was the first act of spine Eleanor had allowed herself in that great house, the first time she had said, without words, that she would decide who deserved her courtesy. A week later, the evening before the wedding banns were to be called in the church, something happened at the writing desk. Edmund had gone out for a walk in the wet garden. He had left the study door open to clear the air, the way his father had taught him on summer nights when the house felt too close. Eleanor was passing with the finished veil, folded over her arm like a sleeping child. She saw the open door. She saw the silver tray on the desk. She saw the letter. It was the same letter. The dark blue wax was still pressed into the shape of his crest, a lion with a small bent star above it. But it had not been sent. A second folded paper had slipped out of the back of the envelope and was lying on the desk, almost hidden under the edge of the blotter. The second paper was older. The edges were soft, as if they had been held and held and held again. The writing on it was in Edmund's hand, but it was younger, and the ink had gone brown. Eleanor knew she should not look. She knew a maid who read her master's letter would lose her place and worse. She knew the rule. Mrs. Hale had said it plain, on Eleanor's first morning, in the small back kitchen over bread and tea. Never put your eyes on what is not yours to see. Eleanor read it. The first letter, the cold one meant for Lady Catherine, ran as she had expected. The rooms, the days, the closed heart. Eleanor read it with the same face she had for everything else in that house. She did not feel surprised. She felt, instead, the deep, tired feeling of a person who has seen cold letters before, in other drawers, in other houses, written by other men who thought cruelty was the same as cleanness. The second letter stopped her. It was a letter Edmund had written 3 winters ago, on the night his first wife Anne had died. It was not meant for anyone but the inside of his own desk. It said, "I have loved one woman, I have lost her. I will not write another letter like the one for Catherine if I can help it. If I can help it, I will try to be a smaller kind of man. If I cannot, I will keep her safe in the way I kept Anne safe, which is to say not safe at all." Eleanor set the letter down. She stood for a long time with the candlelight moving on the wall, as if the flame itself were thinking. The clock in the west hall ticked. The rain outside began against the window. Soft at first and then a little harder, the way a hand begins to knock. She was not the kind of woman who was given to pity. She had not been raised that way. Her own mother had told her, on her last afternoon before the slow sickness took her, that pity can become a small cage if you are not careful with it. Have a soft heart, her mother had said, but do not turn it into a habit you cannot put down. But Eleanor felt, in her chest and in her hands, that the man who had let her be laughed at by his guests was also the man who could not bring himself to love the woman he was about to marry. He had been cruel to Eleanor by leaving her open to mockery. He had also been cruel to himself by building a life in which a single tear would bring the whole house down around his ears. He was, in his own quiet way, the most unlucky man she had ever known, because his unluck had not even let him see how unlucky he had become. She's understood, with a soft and aching clarity. that the letter was a window into his locked room, and she understood that a window, once seen through, cannot be unseen. Edmund returned from the garden. His coat was dark at the shoulders with rain. He saw his study door open. He saw Eleanor standing by the desk. He saw the letter on her hand. He went very still, the way a man goes still when he hears his own name spoken in a voice he did not expect to hear. Neither of them spoke. Eleanor did not run. She did not curtsy. She did not pretend she had not seen. She had done enough pretending for one life. Pretending, she had come to understand, was another word for a small, slow dying. She said, very softly, "You let them laugh at me in your great hall." Why? Edmund closed the door behind him. He set his hat down. He said, "I did not think of you as a person in the room. I thought of you as a piece of work in the house. I am not proud of that." Eleanor said, "And your bride? Did you think of her as a piece of work in the house?" Edmund did not answer for a long breath. He looked at the letter on the desk, and he looked at his own hands, and he looked at the rain moving on the glass. Then he said, "I have been the same kind of small, cruel man to everyone, because I did not know how to be any other kind. I lost the only woman I could feel, and I thought that if I closed the door on feeling, no one could leave me again." Eleanor listened. She thought of Margaret, with her thin children and her drinking man. She thought of the debt note and the vinegar smell of it. She thought of her own mother, who had taught her to stitch by candlelight, and who had said, in her last week, that the world is full of small locked doors, and that a quiet woman carries the keys to more of them than any loud man ever will. Eleanor did not forgive him, not yet. Forgiveness is not a thing that can be given in a single breath, the way one gives a coin across a counter. It must be earned the way a fire is earned, slow, and with the right wood, and only by the person who stands close enough to feel it. But she set the letter down on the desk with care. She did not crease it. She did not stain it. She folded the second, older letter back along its old lines, and laid it beside the cold one. She left them where he would find them, just as he had left the bread and the tea she had mentioned to Mrs. Hale that night, as a small piece of kindness no one had demanded. Edmund watched her lay the letters down. He looked at the calluses on her fingers, the small white seams across her knuckles from years of needle and thread. He saw, for the first time, that the woman who had mended his bride's glove was the same woman who had been forced to play 3 quiet notes in a hostile room. And he felt, with the kind of pain that does not shout, that he had been wrong twice in one night, and that the second wrong was worse than the first, because the second wrong was to himself. He said, very quietly, "If I wrote a different letter tonight, to her or to anyone in this house, would you believe it?" Eleanor said, "I would have to read it first." She picked up the folded veil. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. She did not turn around. She said, "The bread in the doorway. Was it you?" He said, "Yes." She opened the door. She stepped into the hall. She did not look back because she knew, in the way that quiet women know many things, that if she looked back now, she would have to forgive him too soon. The next morning, Eleanor did not go down to the workroom. The Duke did not send the cold letter to Lady Catherine. He sent instead a short note to her father. He wrote that he wished his bride and her family well, but that he could not marry. He returned the land papers and the dowry money he had taken for his own house, with a quiet note to the bankers that the sum was full and that no interest would be claimed. He wrote that he was sorry, and that his sorry was not a small word. He signed the letter with his full name and not his title, because he thought, in that small, private way, that a man asking forgiveness should not sign himself a duke. Lady Catherine did not weep. Her father did, but his weeping was for his own lost house and his own lost name. She took her trunks home in the afternoon. She did not blame Eleanor, because no one had told her about Eleanor, and because Catherine was, in her own way, a quiet woman too. She thought only of her own 2 hands and what they would have to do next. In her own quiet way, Eleanor respected her for that, and would respect her for it, for the rest of her life. For a week the great house was quiet. The flowers wilted in their vases, and they smelled, by the 3rd morning, of something sweet and a little sad. The piano was rolled out. The candle stubs cooled in their sticks. Servants whispered in the kitchen. They wondered what would happen to them now that there was no bride, and no new heir, and no reason for the candles to be carried up the stairs. Mrs. Hale, the kind housekeeper, walked the halls with her hands folded, and she said nothing because she understood. In a way, Mrs. Hale understood many things, that sometimes a house must be quiet before it can be anything else. For the first 3 evenings, the Duke did not see Eleanor. She stayed in the workroom by choice. She sent word through Mrs. Hale that she would leave the house when the next month began. She had paid most of her sister's debt. She had enough coin to take a small room in the village, near the church, with a window that looked out over the river. She would stitch and mend for the local families, and she would not be in any great house again, she said. Not in this life. She was tired of being a small, quiet piece in a house that did not know her name. Edmund sent word back once through Mrs. Hale. He said, "Stay 1 more night. I have something to give you. It is not a ring. It is not a title. It is a key." On the last evening, he met her at the small door of the back garden, where the roses grew thick against the wall. He did not wear his coat. He did not wear his ring. He held a single iron key in his hand, and it was dark with age. He said, "This is the key to the small library at the end of the West Hall, where no one goes. It is yours. You may bring whatever you like into it. You may keep it shut when you wish. The room is no longer part of my house. It is part of your life. If I am ever unkind to you again, I will give you a second key, and you may lock this room and keep me from it. That is my word." Eleanor took the key. It was cold in her hand, and a little rough at the teeth. She said, "And if I am ever unkind to you?" Edmund said, "It will not happen, but if it does, I will give you the second key to my study, and you may read whatever I am writing in it. Even the worst of it. Even the closed-heart letters I once thought were fair." Eleanor looked up at him. He had a kind of sad face now, not the loose, cruel face he had worn that night in the hall. He had the face of a man who has been told, softly, by a quiet woman with calluses on her fingers, that he had been the kind of small boy who became the kind of small man, and who could, with patience, become a different kind of man by morning. She did not love him, not yet. She did not know if she would ever love him, but she felt that she could live in the same house with him, and that was more than most women in this world could say about any man. She said, "I will stay 1 more season, 1 season only. After that we will both decide what comes next. Not you, not me, both of us." Edmund nodded. He walked her back to the side door of the workroom. He stood in the dark hall, and he watched her candlelight cross the window. He did not speak. He did not knock. He did the only thing he had learned to do in 3 winters of silence. He waited. And he was not, this time, quite so afraid that waiting would end with another woman dead. In the small library the next morning, Eleanor found a slip of paper on the desk, beside a clean candle and a glass of water. It was in Edmund's hand. It was not a love letter. It was not a command. It was a small piece of writing he had sat down to write in the dark, in the room he had slept in alone for 3 winters. It said, "I am sorry for the laughter in the hall. I am sorry for the closed heart. I am sorry for the bread I left and did not sign. I will not be that kind of man again. I will try to be a smaller kind of man, the way I said in the older letter I would try. If you read this, keep it for as long as you wish. Then give it back when you are ready to give it back." Eleanor folded the note. She kept it. She did not show it to anyone. She put it in the small pocket of her work apron, where her thumb could find it through the cloth when her hands were cold. That evening, she sat down at the piano in the small ballroom. The piano was still out of tune in the middle keys, and she did not fix it. She played 3 notes, the same 3 she had played the night the ladies had laughed. But this time, when she lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest on her knees, the candle in the room did not go out. The flame stayed where it was, steady and warm. The way a small thing stays steady when 2 quiet people have at last agreed to be in the same room at the same time, without pretending they are not. And the letter, the dark blue letter meant for his bride, sat folded in a drawer in Edmund's study, never sent, and would never be sent. It would wait there, the way good letters wait, for the person it was meant for to become, in time. The person who was never going to read it. If her silence broke him, perhaps a single kind word in a doorway might do the same for someone you love. Leave me a comment and tell me, should she have forgiven him so soon, or should she have kept the second key in her pocket until spring? And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing so another quiet woman does not fade from view.